On a freezing night, a maid's daughter paused to help a forgotten old man no one else saw. Unaware her compassion would uncover a billionaire's hidden past. The night was cruel in Northwood. Wind howled through empty streets, biting through every layer of cloth and hope. 17-year-old Abigail hurried past the benches, past the faces that looked away, until she saw him. An old man, shivering, lost, clutching a faded photograph like a memory refusing to die. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, her breath fogging in the frozen air. I can't find my home," he whispered. "It has a blue door. And roses." She hesitated, one step away from keeping her job, one act away from losing everything. But kindness won. What Abigail didn't know was that this moment, this choice would pull her into a story of love, loss, and a legacy buried beneath snow. This is the story of how a single act of compassion changed everything. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. A biting wind swept through the streets of Northwood, carrying with it the first flakes of a promised snowstorm. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, a stark reminder of the harshness of winter. For 17-year-old Abigail, it was just another day. Another day of fighting against the cold, against the dead, against the feeling that life was something to be endured, not lived. She pulled her thin coat tighter, her blonde hair whipping around her face, and hurried down the sidewalk, her mind a whirlwind of numbers. Numbers that never seemed to add up. Her mother, Mary, worked as a maid, her hands raw and tired from scrubbing the floors of other people's lives. But no matter how hard she worked, the pile of bills on their small kitchen table only grew taller. The landlord's notices became more frequent, the final warnings more severe. Abigail's part-time job at the local diner barely made a dent in their debt, but it was something. It was a handful of dollars to keep the lights on for another week, to buy a loaf of bread, to pretend that they were not slowly drowning. This evening, the weight of it all felt heavier than usual. Her mother had been quiet at breakfast, her eyes distant and filled with a worry that she tried to hide behind a brave smile. Abigail knew what that silence meant. It meant that they were running out of time. As she turned the corner, a figure hunched on a bench caught her eye. An old man, lost in the vastness of the city, clutching a worn-out photograph. His clothes were thin, his face etched with a confusion that tugged at Abigail's heart. Everyone else rushed past, their heads down, their collars up, too consumed by their own lives to notice the old man shivering in the encroaching twilight. Abigail hesitated. She was already late for her shift. She couldn't afford to lose this job. But her mother's words, a constant refrain from her childhood, echoed in her mind. "Kindness costs nothing, Abby. It's the one thing we can always afford to give." She took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs, and walked towards the old man. A single choice, a simple act of compassion, was about to change her life forever. The old man looked up as she approached, his eyes a faded blue, clouded with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. He held the photograph with trembling hands, his gaze fixed on the smiling faces of a young couple, their images faded with time. "Sir, are you all right?" Abigail asked, her voice soft, not wanting to startle him. He blinked, as if waking from a dream. I seem to be lost," he murmured, his voice raspy with age. "I was supposed to meet my son, but I can't remember where." Abigail's heart ached for him. She looked around, but the street was emptying, the warmth of homes and restaurants a stark contrast to the cold isolation of the bench. "Where do you live, sir? I can help you get home." He shook his head, a flicker of despair in his eyes. "I don't remember the address. Just the house. It has a blue door, and a garden full of roses in the summer." A blue door and a rose garden. In a city of thousands of houses, it was a hopeless clue. Abigail's mind raced. Her shift at the diner, the mounting bills, her mother's worried face. She should leave. She had to leave. But the image of this old man, alone and forgotten, was a weight on her conscience that she couldn't ignore. "My name is Abigail," she said, offering a small smile. "What's your name?" "Henry," he said, his voice a little stronger. "Henry Fitzgerald." "Well, Henry," Abigail said, her decision made. "Let's get you somewhere warm first, and then we'll figure out the rest." She helped him to his feet, his arm frail under her touch. As they walked towards the diner, the snow began to fall, blanketing the city in a soft, white silence. Abigail had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness would unravel a story of love, loss, and a connection to her own family that she never could have imagined. A story that would lead her to a world of unimaginable wealth and a legacy of a war hero she had only known through faded photographs. The diner was a small beacon of warmth in the cold, wintry night. The smell of coffee and fried food hung in the air, a comforting aroma that always made Abigail feel a little bit closer to home. She led Henry to a booth in the corner, away from the prying eyes of the few customers scattered around the room. He sank onto the vinyl seat, his shoulders slumping with a weariness that seemed to go beyond his age. "Thank you, my dear," he said, his voice filled with a genuine gratitude that made Abigail's heart swell. "You are a very kind young lady." "It's no problem, Henry," she replied, sliding into the seat opposite him. "Let me get you some coffee. It'll warm you up." She flagged down a waitress, a woman named Carol who had worked at the diner for as long as Abigail could remember. Carol was a no-nonsense woman with a heart of gold, and she looked at Henry with a mixture of pity and concern. "Everything all right here, Abby?" she asked, her eyes lingering on the old man's worn-out clothes. "He's a little lost, Carol," Abigail explained. "I'm just trying to help him find his way home." Carol nodded, her expression softening. "Well, you're a good kid. The coffee's on the house for your friend." As Carol walked away, Abigail turned back to Henry. He was staring out the window, his eyes fixed on the falling snow. There was a sadness in his gaze, a deep and profound loneliness that seemed to emanate from him. "Tell me about the photograph, Henry," Abigail said gently, hoping to distract him from his worries. He looked down at the picture in his hands, his fingers tracing the edges of the faded image. "This is my wife, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And that's me, a long, long time ago." Abigail leaned in to get a closer look. The photograph was black and white, the couple in the picture dressed in the fashion of a bygone era. The young man was handsome, his smile full of a confident charm. And the woman was beautiful, her eyes sparkling with a love that seemed to transcend time. "She's beautiful, Henry," Abigail said softly. "She was," he replied, a single tear tracing a path down his wrinkled cheek. "The most beautiful woman in the world. She passed away a few years ago. I miss her every day." Abigail's heart went out to him. She knew the pain of loss, the gaping hole that is left behind when a loved one is gone. She thought of her own father, who had passed away when she was just a little girl, leaving a void in their lives that could never be filled. "I'm so sorry, Henry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the fog of confusion seemed to lift, and she saw a flicker of something else in his gaze. A sharpness, an intelligence, that belied his frail appearance. "You remind me of her, you know," he said, his voice clear and steady. "You have the same kind eyes." Abigail felt a blush creep up her cheeks. She was just an ordinary girl, a maid's daughter struggling to make ends meet. To be compared to the beautiful woman in the photograph was a compliment she didn't know how to accept. Just then, Carol returned with the coffee, her presence breaking the emotional intensity of the moment. She placed the steaming mugs on the table, her eyes lingering on the photograph in Henry's hands. "That's a beautiful picture," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Thank you," Henry said, his voice once again raspy and distant. As Carol walked away, Abigail's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her mother. Her heart sank. She had completely forgotten about her shift. She was late, very late. "I have to take this," she said to Henry, her voice filled with a renewed sense of panic. She answered the phone, her mother's worried voice on the other end. "Abby, where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Abigail said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm at the diner. I was a little held up." "What happened? Did you miss your shift?" I'm not sure," Abigail stammered. "I'll be home as soon as I can." She hung up the phone, her hand trembling. She had to go. She had to get to work. But what about Henry? She couldn't just leave him here. "Is everything all right, my dear?" he asked, his eyes full of a genuine concern that made her feel even more torn. I have to go to work," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm late. I might lose my job." Henry's face fell. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. You should go. Don't worry about me." But Abigail couldn't go. She couldn't leave this old man to fend for himself. She thought of her great-uncle, her Grandpa Thomas. He had been a war hero, a man of courage and principle. He had always taught her to do the right thing, no matter the cost. And leaving Henry here, alone and confused, was not the right thing. "No," she said, her voice firm with a newfound resolve. "I'm not leaving you. We're going to find your home. Together." She took out her phone and opened the map application. She knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. "Tell me, Henry," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Do you remember anything else? Any landmarks? A park? A store? Anything?" He closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. "There was a bridge," he said slowly. "A small stone bridge. And a river. The water, it was so clear." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. She knew that bridge. It was on the other side of town, in the old, historic district. It was a long way from here, but it was a start. "I know that bridge, Henry," she said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I think I know where you live." She stood up, a sense of purpose coursing through her veins. "Come on," she said, helping him to his feet. "Let's go." They stepped out of the diner and into the cold, wintry night. The snow was falling thicker now, covering the city in a pristine blanket of white. The world was quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of the city silenced by the storm. As they walked towards the bus stop, Abigail couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She was walking into the unknown, with a man she had just met, to a place she had never been before. But there was also a sense of excitement, a feeling that she was on the verge of something important. Little did she know, this journey to find Henry's home would be a journey into her own past, a journey that would uncover a secret that would change her family's life forever. A secret that connected her to a world of wealth and power she had only ever dreamed of. A secret that would prove that sometimes the greatest treasures are not made of gold and silver, but of kindness, courage, and the enduring power of the human heart. The bus ride was a long and quiet one. The city lights blurred past the window, the falling snow creating a dreamlike haze. Henry sat beside her, his head resting against the cool glass, his eyes closed. He seemed to have drifted off to sleep, the gentle rocking of the bus a soothing lullaby. Abigail watched him, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. She was scared, of course. Scared of losing her job, scared of her mother's disappointment, scared of the ever-growing mountain of debt that threatened to consume them. But there was also a sense of peace, a feeling that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She thought about her great-uncle, Grandpa Thomas. He had been a man of few words, but his actions had always spoken volumes. He had been a decorated war hero, a man who had faced unimaginable horrors with a quiet courage that had always inspired her. He had passed away when she was just a little girl, but his memory was a constant presence in her life. Her mother had told her stories of his bravery, of his unwavering sense of duty, of his belief that a single person could make a difference in the world. He had left them with very little in terms of material possessions, but he had given them something far more valuable. He had given them a legacy of honor, of integrity, of the importance of standing up for what is right. As the bus rumbled on, Abigail reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It had belonged to her great-uncle, a memento of his time in the war. She opened it, revealing a tiny, black-and-white photograph of a young soldier, his eyes full of a determination that seemed to defy the horrors of war. She had never known the man in the photograph, but she had always felt a deep connection to him. He was a part of her family's history. And as she sat there, on a bus in the middle of a snowstorm, with a lost old man by her side, she felt his presence more strongly than ever. The bus finally came to a stop at the edge of the historic district. The snow was falling heavily now, the wind howling through the old, narrow streets. Abigail gently shook Henry's shoulder. "Henry," she said softly, "we're here." He blinked his eyes open, a look of confusion on his face. Where are we?" "We're at the stone bridge, Henry," she said, her voice full of a hope she didn't quite feel. "Does any of this look familiar?" He peered out the window, his eyes scanning the snow-covered landscape. I think so," he said, his voice hesitant. "The bridge. Yes, I remember the bridge." They stepped off the bus and into the biting cold. The wind was relentless, whipping the snow into a frenzy. Abigail pulled her thin coat tighter, her teeth chattering. "Which way, Henry?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. He looked around, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This way," he said, pointing down a narrow, cobblestone street. They walked in silence, the only sound the crunching of their feet on the fresh snow. The houses in this part of town were old and grand, their windows dark and imposing. It was a world away from the small, cramped apartment that Abigail called home. After a few minutes, Henry stopped in front of a large, wrought-iron gate. Beyond the gate, a long, winding driveway led to a magnificent stone mansion. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with a sense of awe. "This is my home." Abigail stared at the mansion, her mouth agape. It was the biggest house she had ever seen, a palace of stone and glass that seemed to belong in a fairy tale. "You live here, Henry?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and wonder. He nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "I do." He reached for the gate, his hand fumbling with the latch. It was locked. He sighed, a look of disappointment on his face. I don't have the key," he said, his voice full of a familiar confusion. Abigail's heart sank. They had come all this way, only to be met with another dead end. She was about to suggest that they go to the police when a black, luxury car pulled up to the gate. The window rolled down, revealing a man in a sharp, expensive suit. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice cold and authoritative. We're trying to get inside," Abigail stammered, feeling small and insignificant under the man's scrutinizing gaze. The man's eyes narrowed as he looked at Henry. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. I am Henry Fitzgerald," Henry said, his voice a little shaky. "I live here." The man scoffed, a look of amusement on his face. "I think you're mistaken, old man. Mr. Fitzgerald is a very important man. He doesn't just wander the streets in the middle of a snowstorm." He was about to roll up the window when his eyes fell on the photograph in Henry's hand. He leaned in for a closer look, his expression changing from one of amusement to one of shock. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. It's a picture of my wife and me," Henry said, his voice trembling. The man stared at the photograph for a long moment, his eyes darting from the picture to Henry's face. He seemed to be struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. "Mr. Fitzgerald?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Is that really you?" Henry nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. The man fumbled with the controls, the gates swinging open with a soft, electronic hum. He got out of the car, his face pale with a mixture of shock and relief. "Sir, we've been looking for you everywhere," he said, his voice full of a deference that was a stark contrast to his earlier arrogance. "Your son has been worried sick." He opened the car door for Henry, helping him into the back seat with a gentle reverence. He then turned to Abigail, his eyes full of a newfound respect. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice sincere. "You have done a great service for the Fitzgerald family tonight." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash. "Please, take this for your trouble." Abigail stared at the money, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, enough to pay off all of their debts, and then some. But she couldn't take it. It didn't feel right. "No, thank you," she said, her voice firm. "I didn't do it for the money." The man looked at her, a look of surprise on his face. He seemed to be at a loss for words. "Please, at least let me give you a ride home," he said, his voice full of a genuine concern. Abigail hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She was cold and tired, and the thought of another long bus ride was more than she could bear. She got into the car, the plush leather seats a world away from the hard plastic of the bus. As the car pulled away from the mansion, she looked back at the grand, imposing house, a symbol of a world that she had only ever dreamed of, a world that she had stumbled into by chance, a world that she would soon discover was more connected to her own than she could ever have imagined. The car ride back to her side of town was a blur. Abigail was exhausted, her mind struggling to process the events of the evening. She had set out to help a lost old man, and had ended up at the doorstep of a billionaire. It was a story so unbelievable, so fantastical, that it felt like a dream. The man in the suit, who had introduced himself as Mr. Davies, was quiet for most of the ride. He seemed to be as stunned as she was, his mind still reeling from the shock of finding his boss, the elusive and powerful Henry Fitzgerald, wandering the streets in a snowstorm. When they finally arrived at her apartment building, Abigail felt a pang of embarrassment. The building was old and run down, the paint peeling, the windows dark and grimy. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Fitzgerald mansion, a constant reminder of the world that she belonged to. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice small and timid. "Please, call me David," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "And thank you, Abigail. You have no idea what you've done tonight." He handed her a business card, the paper thick and expensive. "If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." She took the card, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. David Davies, Chief of Staff, Fitzgerald Industries. It was a title that meant nothing to her, but she had a feeling that it was a very important one. She got out of the car and watched as it drove away, its taillights disappearing into the snowy night. She stood there for a moment, the business card clutched in her hand, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She had missed her shift. She had probably lost her job. Her mother was going to be worried sick. But as she stood there, in the cold and the snow, she couldn't bring herself to feel any regret. She had done the right thing. And that, she knew, was all that mattered. She walked into the apartment building, the familiar smell of damp and decay a harsh welcome back to reality. She climbed the stairs to their small apartment, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. She opened the door to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, her face a mask of worry. "Abby, where have you been?" she asked, her voice a mixture of relief and frustration. "I was so worried." "I'm sorry, Mom," Abigail said, her voice barely a whisper. I got held up." She sat down at the table, the events of the evening pouring out of her in a rush of words. She told her mother about the old man on the bench, about the photograph, about the blue door and the rose garden. She told her about the long bus ride, about the grand mansion, about the man in the suit. Her mother listened in stunned silence, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and awe. When Abigail was finished, she just sat there for a long moment, her mind struggling to comprehend the incredible story that her daughter had just told her. "A billionaire, Abby," she said, her voice a mixture of wonder and skepticism. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, Mom," Abigail said, her voice firm. "His name is Henry Fitzgerald, and he lives in a mansion on the other side of town." Her mother shook her head, a small smile on her lips. "Well, I'll be," she said, her voice full of a quiet pride. "You always did have a knack for finding trouble, didn't you?" Abigail smiled, a genuine smile for the first time that evening. "I guess I did, Mom," she said, her voice light and happy. "I guess I did." They sat there for a while, the silence of the small apartment a comforting presence. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the city in a soft, white silence. As Abigail got ready for bed, she couldn't help but think about Henry Fitzgerald. She wondered if he was warm and safe, if he had been reunited with his son. She hoped so. She took out the business card that David Davies had given her, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. She knew that she would probably never see Henry Fitzgerald again, that their paths had crossed for a brief, fleeting moment, and would now diverge forever. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end of the story, that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take her to places she had never dreamed of and uncover a secret that would change her life forever. The next morning, the city was a winter wonderland. The snow had stopped falling, and the sun was shining, its rays reflecting off the pristine white landscape. But the beauty of the day was lost on Abigail. She had been fired from her job at the diner, and the reality of their financial situation was a heavy weight on her shoulders. She spent the day in a daze, her mind replaying the events of the previous evening over and over again. She couldn't shake the image of Henry Fitzgerald's face, the sadness in his eyes, the way he had looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and kindness. She thought about calling the number on the business card, just to see if he was all right. But she didn't want to be a bother. She was just a girl from the poor side of town, and he was a billionaire. Their worlds were too far apart. As the day wore on, her sense of hopelessness grew. She felt like she was trapped, with no way out. But then, just as she was about to give up, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find a man in a crisp, clean uniform, holding a large, ornate bouquet of roses. "Delivery for Abigail," he said, his voice polite and professional. Abigail was stunned. She had never received flowers in her life. She took the bouquet, her hands trembling. The roses were a deep, vibrant red, their petals soft and velvety. They were the most beautiful flowers she had ever seen. Tucked into the bouquet was a small, white envelope. She opened it, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Inside was a handwritten note, the script elegant and refined. "Dear Abigail," the note began. "Thank you for your kindness. You are a true angel. Please accept this small token of my gratitude. Henry Fitzgerald." Enclosed with the note was a check for $10,000. Abigail stared at the check, her mind struggling to comprehend the number of zeros. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, enough to pay off all of their debts and start a new life. She showed the check to her mother, who was just as stunned as she was. They held each other and cried, tears of joy and relief streaming down their faces. It was a miracle, a true, honest-to-goodness miracle. The next few days were a blur of excitement and activity. They paid off their debts, bought new clothes, and even started looking for a new apartment. For the first time in a long time, they felt a sense of hope, a feeling that things were finally going to be all right. But as the initial excitement wore off, Abigail couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The money was a gift, a godsend, but it also felt like a handout. She wanted to earn her own way, to make her own mark on the world. She decided to call the number on the business card. She wanted to thank Mr. Fitzgerald in person and to tell him that she didn't want any more of his money. She was nervous as she dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest. But to her surprise, David Davies answered on the first ring. "Abigail, I was hoping you would call," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "Mr. Fitzgerald would like to see you. He has a proposition for you." Abigail was intrigued. A proposition? What could a man like Henry Fitzgerald possibly want from a girl like her? She agreed to meet him at his office the next day. The Fitzgerald Industries building was a towering skyscraper of glass and steel, a symbol of the immense wealth and power that the Fitzgerald family commanded. As she stepped into the elevator, her heart was in her throat. She felt like she was stepping into a different world, a world where she didn't belong. But when she was shown into Mr. Fitzgerald's office, she was surprised to find that it was not as intimidating as she had imagined. It was a large, spacious room, but it was also warm and inviting, with a comfortable fireplace and a wall of books. And sitting behind a large, mahogany desk was Henry Fitzgerald. He looked different from the last time she had seen him. His clothes were immaculate, his hair was neatly combed, and the fog of confusion was gone from his eyes. But he still had the same kind smile, the same gentle eyes. "Abigail, my dear," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. "Please have a seat." She sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. She felt a strange mix of emotions. She was in awe of the man in front of her, but she was also not afraid of him. There was a kindness, a gentleness, about him that put her at ease. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me," he said, his voice full of a sincere gratitude. "You saved my life, Abigail, and for that, I will be forever grateful." "It was nothing, Mr. Fitzgerald," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Please call me Henry," he said, a warm smile on his face. And it was not nothing. It was everything. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "Abigail, I have a proposition for you. I would like you to come and work for me." Abigail was stunned. "Work for you? But what could I possibly do?" "I want you to be my personal assistant," he said, his voice firm and confident. "I need someone to help me with my correspondence, to organize my schedule, to accompany me to meetings. I need someone I can trust. And I trust you, Abigail." Abigail was at a loss for words. It was an incredible opportunity, a chance to work for one of the most powerful men in the country. But she was just a girl from the poor side of town, with no experience, no qualifications. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," he said, his voice gentle but persuasive. "Say yes, and I promise you, you will not regret it." She looked into his eyes, and she saw a man who believed in her, who saw something in her that she didn't even see in herself. And in that moment, she knew that she had to say yes. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Yes, I'll do it." A broad smile spread across Henry's face. "Excellent," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I knew you were a smart girl." And so began a new chapter in Abigail's life. She moved into a small apartment in a nice part of town, and she started working for Henry Fitzgerald. It was a world away from her old life, a world of luxury and privilege that she had only ever dreamed of. But as she got to know Henry, she realized that he was not like the other rich and powerful people she had read about in the newspapers. He was a kind and gentle man, a man who had never forgotten where he came from. He told her stories of his childhood, of his struggles, of the love of his life, his wife Eleanor. He told her about the war, about the friends he had lost, about the sacrifices he had made. And as she listened to his stories, she began to realize that there was a connection between them, a bond that went beyond that of an employer and an employee. It was a bond of friendship, of mutual respect, of a shared understanding of the importance of kindness and compassion. One day, as they were looking through some old photographs, Henry pulled out a picture of a young soldier. Abigail's heart skipped a beat. It was the same soldier as in her great uncle's locket. "Who is that, Henry?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is my best friend. Thomas. We served together in the war. He saved my life." Abigail's mind reeled. Thomas. Grandpa Thomas. It couldn't be. She pulled out her locket and showed it to Henry. He stared at it, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It was my great-uncle's," she said, her voice shaking. "His name was Thomas." Henry looked at her, his eyes full of a dawning realization. "Abigail," he said, his voice trembling. "What was your great-uncle's last name?" "Miller," she said, her voice barely audible. "Thomas Miller." Henry's face went pale. He sank back into his chair, his hand over his heart. "Thomas Miller," he whispered, his voice full of a mixture of awe and wonder. "I've been looking for his family for years." He looked at Abigail, his eyes full of a love and a gratitude that was so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. "It was no accident that we met that night, Abigail," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was fate. It was destiny. It was your great-uncle, watching over us, bringing us together." And in that moment, Abigail knew that he was right. It was not a coincidence. It was a miracle that had brought her to this man, to this place, to this life. A life that was far beyond anything she could ever have imagined. A life that was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of the human spirit, and the enduring legacy of a war hero who had taught her that the greatest treasures are not made of gold and silver, but of love, courage, and the unwavering belief that a single person can make a difference in the world. "I can't believe it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Neither can I," Henry said, his voice a low rumble of awe. "For 50 years, I've searched for him. After the war, we lost touch. I came back to a world that had moved on, and so did he. I tried to find him, wrote letters to every Miller in his hometown, but they all came back unanswered. I thought I'd never know what became of him." He took a deep, shaky breath, composing himself. "He was the bravest man I ever knew, Abigail. He saved my life more times than I can count. There was this one time, in the Ardennes, the shelling was relentless. We were pinned down, a whole platoon of us. Thomas, he single-handedly took out a machine gun nest that had us trapped. He was wounded, but he never faltered. He was a hero." Abigail listened, captivated. She had heard stories of her great-uncle's bravery, but they had always felt distant, like tales from another lifetime. Hearing it from someone who had been there, who had witnessed his courage firsthand, made it real. It filled her with a sense of pride that was so profound, it made her heart ache. "He never talked about the war," she said softly. "My mother said he came back a changed man. Quieter, more reserved. He carried a sadness with him, a weight that he never shared with anyone." Henry nodded, his eyes distant. "We all did. The war, it takes something from you. A piece of your soul that you can never get back. But Thomas, he never lost his goodness. He never lost his compassion. Even in the midst of all that horror, he was always looking out for the little guy, always ready to lend a helping hand." He looked at Abigail, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Just like you," he said, his voice full of a genuine affection. "You have his heart, Abigail. His kind, compassionate heart." In the weeks that followed, a new routine settled in. Abigail became more than just Henry's personal assistant. She became his confidant, his companion, his connection to a past he thought he had lost forever. They spent hours together, poring over old photographs, sharing stories, and piecing together the life of the man who connected them. Abigail learned that Henry, like her great-uncle, had come from humble beginnings. He had built his empire from the ground up, with nothing but a dream and an unwavering determination to succeed. He was a self-made man, a testament to the power of hard work and perseverance. But he had never forgotten his roots. He was a generous philanthropist, a man who had dedicated his life to helping others. Through Henry, Abigail discovered a side of her great-uncle she had never known. He had been a talented artist, a man who could capture the beauty of the world in a simple sketch. He had been a lover of poetry, a man who could recite Shakespeare by heart. He had been a romantic, a man who had been deeply in love with a woman he had met during the war, a woman he had lost to a tragic accident just before he was due to come home. That's why he never married, Henry explained, his voice full of a quiet sadness. He said he had already given his heart away, and he could never love another. The story brought tears to Abigail's eyes. She thought of her great-uncle, a man who had been so full of life, so full of love, and yet had been destined to live a life of quiet solitude. It made her appreciate the small joys of her own life, the love of her mother, the friendship of a man like Henry. As the days turned into weeks, Abigail blossomed. She shed the insecurities of her past, the feeling that she was not good enough, that she did not belong. She discovered a strength, a confidence, a sense of purpose that she had never known before. She was no longer just a maid's daughter. She was a young woman with a bright future, a woman who was making a difference in the world. She also got to know Henry's son, James. He was a man in his late 40s, with his father's sharp mind and his mother's kind eyes. At first, he had been wary of Abigail, suspicious of her sudden appearance in his father's life. But as he saw the profound effect she had on Henry, the way she brought a light back into his eyes, a joy back into his life, his suspicion turned to gratitude, and then to a deep and abiding affection. "You've given him a gift, Abigail," he told her one day, his voice full of a sincere appreciation. "You've given him back his past. You've given him back a piece of himself." But not everyone was as welcoming as James. Henry's board of directors, a group of powerful and influential men, were not happy with Abigail's presence. They saw her as a threat, a distraction, a young woman who had somehow managed to worm her way into the old man's affections. They whispered behind her back, their voices laced with suspicion and contempt. They spread rumors. They questioned her motives. They did everything they could to undermine her. The leader of this opposition was a man named Arthur Vance, a ruthless and ambitious man who had been Henry's right-hand man for years. He saw Abigail as an obstacle to his own plans, a threat to his own power. He was determined to get rid of her, one way or another. The conflict came to a head during a crucial board meeting. Henry was proposing a new initiative, a charitable foundation dedicated to helping veterans and their families. It was a project that was deeply personal to him, a way of honoring the memory of his friend, Thomas Miller. But Vance and his faction were vehemently opposed. They saw it as a waste of money, a sentimental project that would do nothing to improve the company's bottom line. They argued, they debated, they tried to bully Henry into submission. Abigail sat by Henry's side, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been in a room with so many powerful men, had never witnessed such a display of corporate greed and ambition. She felt small and insignificant, a lamb in a den of wolves. But then she looked at Henry. He was old, he was frail, but he was not weak. He sat there, calm and composed, his eyes full of a quiet determination. He listened to their arguments, their threats, their condescending remarks. And when they were finished, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it was firm, and it was clear. He spoke of his friendship with Thomas Miller, of the sacrifices they had made, of the debt that they owed to the men and women who had fought for their country. He spoke of the importance of compassion, of giving back, of making a difference in the world. And as he spoke, Abigail saw a change in the room. The men who had been so arrogant, so dismissive, began to look down at their hands, their faces flushed with a mixture of shame and guilt. They had been so focused on profits and power that they had forgotten the human cost of war, the human value of compassion. When Henry was finished, there was a long, profound silence. And then, one by one, the board members began to speak. They spoke of their own fathers, their own grandfathers, their own brothers who had served in the military. They spoke of the debt that they owed, the gratitude that they felt. And in the end, the vote was unanimous. The foundation was approved. It was a victory for Henry, a victory for the memory of Thomas Miller, a victory for the power of kindness and compassion. As they walked out of the boardroom, Henry leaned on Abigail's arm, his steps slow but steady. He looked at her, a proud smile on his face. "You were very brave in there, Abigail," he said, his voice full of a genuine admiration. "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and humility. "You did more than you know," he said, his eyes twinkling. "You were my strength. You were my courage. You were my conscience." And in that moment, Abigail knew that she had found her place in the world. She was no longer just a maid's daughter, no longer just a personal assistant. She was a partner, a confidant, a friend. She was a part of something bigger than herself, a part of a legacy of kindness and compassion that would live on long after she was gone. The winter snow began to melt, replaced by the first signs of spring. The days grew longer, the air grew warmer, and the world seemed to be waking from a long, deep sleep. And as the seasons changed, so did Abigail's life. The Thomas Miller Foundation was a resounding success. It provided financial assistance, job training, and emotional support to thousands of veterans and their families. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of a single act of kindness. Abigail threw herself into the work of the foundation, her passion and dedication inspiring everyone around her. She was no longer the shy, insecure girl who had stumbled into Henry Fitzgerald's life. She was a confident, capable young woman, a leader, a force for good in the world. And as she worked, she learned more and more about her great-uncle, the man who had unknowingly brought her and Henry together. She learned that he had been a man of great integrity, a man who had always stood up for what he believed in, no matter the cost. He had been a champion of the underdog, a protector of the weak, a man who had dedicated his life to serving others. She realized that she was not just honoring his memory, she was continuing his legacy. She was carrying the torch that he had passed on, a torch of kindness, of compassion, of the unwavering belief that a single person can make a difference in the world. One sunny afternoon, as she was walking through the park, she saw a young girl sitting on a bench, crying. She was a young, single mother, and she had just been evicted from her apartment. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Abigail sat down next to her, her heart going out to the young woman. She listened to her story, her words of comfort and reassurance a soothing balm to the young mother's wounded soul. And then she did something that would have been unthinkable just a few months ago. She took out her checkbook and wrote a check for a sum of money that would have been a fortune to her in her old life. It was enough to get the young woman a new apartment, to buy her some food, to give her a fresh start. The young mother looked at the check, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. She threw her arms around Abigail, her tears of despair turning to tears of joy. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for caring." As Abigail walked away, a sense of peace and contentment washed over her. She had not done it for the praise, for the recognition, for the feeling of self-satisfaction. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. She had done it because it was what her great-uncle would have done. She had finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It was not about money, or power, or possessions. It was about the ability to make a difference in the lives of others. It was about the joy of giving, the satisfaction of helping, the profound and enduring legacy of a kind and compassionate heart. As she looked up at the sky, the sun warm on her face, she felt a sense of gratitude that was so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. She was grateful for the hardships she had faced, for the struggles she had endured, for the journey that had brought her to this place. She was grateful for her mother, for her unwavering love and support. She was grateful for Henry, for his friendship, his wisdom, his belief in her. And most of all, she was grateful for her great-uncle, the man she had never known, the man who had changed her life forever. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges, more obstacles, more struggles to overcome. But she was no longer afraid. She was strong. She was confident. She was ready to face whatever the future held. For she knew that she was not alone. She was a part of a legacy, a chain of kindness that stretched back through the generations. A legacy that had begun with a brave young soldier in the midst of a terrible war, a legacy that had been passed down to a lonely old man in a grand and empty mansion, a legacy that now rested in the hands of a young woman with a kind and compassionate heart. And as she walked on, her steps light and sure, she knew that she would carry that legacy forward, that she would be a beacon of hope in a world that was often dark and unforgiving. She would be a testament to the power of a single act of kindness, a reminder that even in the coldest of winters, the warmth of the human heart can make the most beautiful of flowers bloom. 1 year later, the auditorium was filled to capacity, a sea of distinguished guests in elegant attire, their polite applause echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. On the stage, under the warm glow of the spotlights, stood Abigail. A year ago, she would have been invisible in a room like this, another face in the crowd, or more likely, one of the staff serving drinks. Tonight, she was the keynote speaker. She wore a simple, dark blue dress, a stark contrast to the glittering jewels and designer gowns around her, but she stood with a poise and confidence that commanded the room's attention. It was the first anniversary gala for the Thomas Miller Foundation. In just 12 months, it had become a formidable force for good, a testament to what could be accomplished when compassion was backed by resources. Abigail looked out at the audience, her eyes finding her mother, Mary, in the front row. Mary's eyes were shining with tears, a proud, radiant smile on her face. Next to her sat James Fitzgerald, who gave Abigail a reassuring nod. A year ago, Abigail began, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone but losing none of its warmth. I met a man on a cold winter night. He was lost, and he was alone. Helping him seemed like a small thing at the time, the kind of thing anyone would do. She paused, a gentle smile touching her lips. But I've learned this past year that the small things are often the ones that matter most. They are the hinges on which our lives can turn. She spoke not of balance sheets or quarterly reports, but of people. She told the story of a young veteran named Michael, who had returned from his tour with injuries both visible and invisible. He had lost his job, his home, and was on the verge of losing his family. The foundation had provided him with physical therapy, counseling, and job placement assistance. Just last week, he had sent Abigail a picture of himself standing in front of his new house, his arms wrapped around his wife and daughter, his smile wide and genuine. She spoke of another veteran, an elderly woman named Sarah, who had served as a nurse in a forgotten war. She was living in poverty, her medals tucked away in a dusty box, her service all but erased by time. The foundation had given her a grant to live comfortably, to have the dignity she had earned. More than that, they had helped her record her story, preserving her legacy for future generations. As Abigail spoke, the room grew quiet. The clinking of glasses ceased, the polite murmurs died down. The audience was captivated, not by a polished speech, but by the raw, honest emotion in her voice. They were not just donors. They were witnesses to the profound impact of their generosity. She concluded her speech by holding up the small, tarnished silver locket that had once belonged to her great-uncle. This locket belonged to Thomas Miller, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He was a hero who saved the life of his best friend, Henry Fitzgerald. They were two ordinary men who did extraordinary things. This foundation is their legacy. It is a testament to their belief that no one who serves should ever be forgotten. It is a promise that we will always be there to help our heroes find their way home. The applause that followed was thunderous, a standing ovation that went on for several minutes. As Abigail stepped down from the stage, her heart was full. The praise, the accolades, they were nice, but they were not what mattered. What mattered was the feeling that she was a part of something bigger than herself, a part of a chain of kindness that stretched back through the generations. Later that evening, after the last of the guests had departed, Abigail found herself alone in the quiet of the grand ballroom. She walked over to the large window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness. It was a clear, cold night, the sky full of stars. It was exactly 1 year ago tonight that she had met Henry. She thought about the girl she had been then, so full of fear and uncertainty, so burdened by the weight of the world. And she thought about the woman she had become, a woman of purpose, of strength, of unwavering resolve. The journey had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of insecurity, a feeling like an imposter in a world that she didn't belong to. Arthur Vance and a few of his allies on the board still watched her with suspicion, their courtesy a thin veil for their resentment. But she had learned to stand her ground, to speak her truth, to fight for what she believed in. She had Henry's letters and journals to guide her, and in his words, she found the courage to persevere. She also had her mother's unwavering love, a constant reminder of where she came from, of the values that had been instilled in her long before she had ever heard the name Fitzgerald. A soft footstep behind her made her turn. It was James. "He would have been so proud of you tonight, Abigail," he said, his voice gentle. "I hope so," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I know so," he said, his eyes full of a sincere warmth. "You've not only preserved his legacy, you've amplified it. You've given it a heart, a soul. You've become the daughter he never had." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. She had lost a great uncle she had never known, but she had gained a father figure, a mentor, a friend. And in his son, she had found a brother. The next day, she took the bouquet of red roses from the gala and drove out to the cemetery. She laid the flowers on Henry's grave, the vibrant red a stark contrast to the pristine white marble. She stood there for a long moment, the cool winter air on her cheeks, the silence of the cemetery a comforting presence. "We did it, Henry," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. "We're making a difference, just like you and Thomas did." She took out the locket, its silver surface cool against her skin. She didn't need to open it. The image of the young soldier was etched in her mind, a constant reminder of the courage, the sacrifice, the love that had set this incredible journey in motion. As she turned to leave, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling of closure, of a circle completed. The past was not a burden to be carried, but a foundation to be built upon. And the future, once a source of so much anxiety, was now a landscape of endless possibility. She was no longer just a maid's daughter. She was a leader, a philanthropist, a storyteller. She was the keeper of a legacy, the guardian of a promise. And as she walked away, her steps light and sure, she knew that this was only the beginning. There were more stories to tell, more lives to touch, more heroes to bring home. The world was full of lost souls, waiting on cold street corners, clutching faded photographs, hoping that someone, somewhere, would stop to help. And Abigail would be there. She would always be there. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.
If you believe that true heroism lies in the everyday acts of dignity and perseverance, then you belong here. Subscribe to Unsung Heroes. Join our community to celebrate the resilience and worth of every individual and ensure their quiet sacrifices never go unnoticed. Like and share. Help us amplify these unfiltered, authentic stories by liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded of the silent power of the human spirit. Be a witness. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a powerful look at life's challenges and triumphs across the American social landscape. Subscribe today and honor the silent power of the human spirit.